Good evening and welcome. This is a meeting of the Special Education Advisory Committee of the Halton District School Board for Tuesday, March the 1st, 2022. Given the need to practice social distancing due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're holding this meeting remotely through a video conference. This meeting is being recorded. In accordance with Ontario Regulation 463-97 and the new guidelines effective February the 1st, 2021, any meeting of the Board of Trustees and/or committee meetings which are open to the public must be live streamed and be able to take questions from the public. The purpose is to foster two-way participation during these meetings. To comply with this, SEAC will be using a Google form, which is attached to each agenda distributed in advance of the meetings and is also posted on the HDSB SEAC website page. Questions posed during live stream meetings of SEAC may be answered during that meeting, particularly those related to agenda items, or at the following meeting at the discretion of the chair. For efficiency, multiple questions received that are similar in nature may be grouped together at the discretion of the chair and/or vice chair. Questions will not be attributed. Notations will be made that multiple people ask the same question. Any questions that contain language that is hateful or discriminatory will not be considered. So first of all, we'll start with a roll call to record who's in attendance. And if you could please answer yes or present. Lou, would you like to lead with that?
I'll start with the trustees. Tracy.
I'm here, present. Hello, everyone.
Heather.
Coming to you from North Vancouver.
Joanna.
Good evening, everyone.
Margot.
Hi, everyone.
Margot, but she's got her mic turned off.
We got Margot. Yeah, she's here.
Hi again.
Association for Bright Children. Yellen.
Present.
Jen.
Nope. Okay.
Autism. Lisa.
Lisa, yeah.
Yep. Community Living Burlington.
Do we have the names for community living?
Candace.
Candace?
Okay.
Not at this time, no.
Easter Seals, Melissa. And I've seen Sarah.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Halton Down Syndrome Association, Sophia.
Sophia will be late.
Okay. And Rebecca.
Present.
Learning Disabilities Association of Halton, our chair, Alison.
Present.
And Diane.
She sends her regrets.
Voice for Children, Aaron.
He sent his regrets.
And Kathy Turner.
Here.
Members at large, James. I've seen him.
I don't see him at the moment.
He was here, but
Okay.
Diane Miller and myself. And then the staff members, Colette.
Good evening.
And any other staff members?
We have a number of staff joining us tonight. I'm happy to introduce them from School Programs Department.
Thank you.
We have Jen Chamberlain, Lori Reed, and Tina Salmini. And from Special Education Services, of course, we always have Sean Marks. But also joining us is Sherry Kish, Sandra Hall, Lisa Dykstra, and Christine Howard.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So first of all, we'll start by honouring the land. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaran, the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honour and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. So our first step tonight is to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting. If there are any modifications or amendments that anyone would like to make, could they please make that known? Okay, not seeing any. If we would like to move then to, would somebody would like to move the acceptance of the agenda? Okay, we've got Catherine Turner moving, and Tracy, would you like to second? Tracy Harrison seconding. And does anybody have any abstention or vote against the acceptance of the agenda as it stands? Not seeing any. The agenda is accepted as presented. Secondly, the minutes were sent through for our meeting of February the 8th, 2022. Are there any errors or omissions that anybody would like to have noted? Okay, not seeing any. Is there somebody who'd like to motion the acceptance of the minutes?
Yalen, would you like to move a motion to approve the minutes?
Sure, I will approve the minute.
And could I get a seconder?
Hi, it's Sarah. I can second that.
Thank you.
Great. Would anybody like to abstain or vote against the acceptance of the minutes? Okay, none being seen, the minutes are approved as presented. Okay, so first of all, we're going to begin with our action items. And as our first item, we have a presentation on the early literacy program and intervention strategy from the board staff. So welcome. I'm not quite sure who's presenting, but welcome to the team that's presenting this evening.
Thanks, Allison. And I've already introduced the team, but I'm not sure who's sharing the PowerPoint. But if we could bring that up, that would be great. And then I'll kind of reintroduce and kind of put it in the context of the broader team. So we're quite excited to present this work this evening. This work has been something that our two departments have been collaborating on since the beginning of this school year. And rather timely that we're sharing this with you this evening on the heels of the release of the Right to Read report from the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, where you will start to see many connections between this work, and as we dive into the over 150 recommendations in that report, we'll see many connections. So I feel that we are off on the right foot, so to speak, in terms of the work that we've undertaken with this joint team, and where we're going to be going with the implementation of the recommendations of the Right to Read. So as I mentioned, we have with us this evening Superintendent Tina Salmini, Principal Lori Reed, and an instructional program leader, Jen Chamberlain. And then we also have, who are not with us this evening, but who are really critical in this work, Monica Churchill, Betsy Enriquez, and Angela Shantz, also IPLs from the School Programs Department. And from the Special Education Services, as I mentioned, we have Christine Howard, Manager of Professional Services, Sherry Kish and Sandra Hall, instructional program leaders, and then, of course, Lisa Dykstra, speech and language pathologist. And with that, we're going to move on to the next slide. I want to highlight also that key part of this work was also 2 principals, making sure that we have a strong lens on the reality of our schools, Beth Hudson and Margaret Napier. And we've asked someone from the Equity and Inclusive Education Department to join our team because, of course, the priorities around equity and inclusion and human rights thread through all of our work, and we want to ensure that we're embedding those key principles in our plan. So they'll be joining our team as well. So our multi-year plan is based on these 5 areas of key priorities, and learning to read is certainly a key piece of our work and an important part of our learning and achievement area in the multi-year plan. But it doesn't just rest there. It does thread through other pillars. Of course, just as I've highlighted, the pillar around equity and inclusion and human rights. We know that learning to read is a key human right and a foundation for equity and inclusion. And so we know that it's not only important in the learning and achievement area, but also in the area of our multi-year plan that focuses on equity and inclusion. And with that, I am turning it over to, I am not sure who.
Me. Thanks so much, Colette. And you took a few words right out of my mouth, so I'll just continue from there. But it's so great to be back tonight and have this opportunity to highlight some of our work around early literacy in our board. We were here last year, many of us, around the exact same time, if I recall. So it's great to have another opportunity to inform you and get your feedback on some of our more recent work. And before we dive into that, we just wanted to highlight, as Colette started to there, some of those links, because as she said, we know that achievement and mental health and well-being and equity are all interconnected. And when we impact one, we impact the others. And so we wanted to highlight that in this work, we've really kept equity centered as we approach this work, not only because we know that the goal of supporting equitable outcomes will be one that supports equity for all, but also in terms of how we get there. So, for example, avoiding Eurocentric or gendered language as we developed instructional or assessment materials, as well as ensuring that our work aligns to the de-streaming work that's also taking place, through our ministry mandates and in our own system. And while that's mostly focused on the grade 8 to 9 piece, we also wanted to ensure that the types of supports and assessments and processes that we're putting in place here are going to also align to that work, and that they're responsive and flexible so that they can act more like a dimmer switch when we're working with students rather than an on and off switch. And then those supports can be raised and lowered flexibly as needed. And in that way, we can keep those pathways open in the future, which was also a really key piece for me in the Right to Read report as well. And then the mental health and well-being piece is important too, because we know that when students struggle to read, that has a negative impact on their sense of self-esteem. And also, even as we impact reading outcomes, we're going to impact student self-esteem. And also in between there, as we do this work, how might we do this work in ways that support mental health and well-being right now? So, for example, providing explicit instruction and vocabulary with texts that also support well-being at the same time. So, I hope that you'll see lots more links as we go, but we just wanted to kind of put a few of those front and center for you. And thinking about the goals for this work in no particular order, one is creating that shared vision for literacy teaching and learning across our system and ensuring that all of our supports align to that vision. And we wanted to build on and reignite some past collaborations between our departments, and this work has given us another opportunity to do so. And again, leveraging that experience and expertise across the department so that we can establish really preventative and proactive processes and strategies and tools so that we can meet students' needs as soon as possible and get that early intervention in place. As well, we wanted to align our system to what we anticipated from the anticipated right to read report now that we have it, and also the anticipated language curriculum and kindergarten curriculum changes. And we know that ensuring evidence-based practices has always been really important to us, and the right to read inquiry has been another catalyst for this work. So now that it's out, we are heartened to see that many aspects in the report have already been part of the evidence-based practices that we've been promoting, and also look forward to other actions that will take place as a result. And then, given our current context, how can we accelerate learning, especially for those learners who have been most impacted by the pandemic and have had uneven learning experiences over the past few years? So we want to do everything we can to move learning forward quickly, and that we need to provide the most explicit and precision instruction and focus our efforts on the students who have been most impacted. And of course, it's not enough for this knowledge and practices and processes to be in place for a small group of people. So at the forefront through all of this has been, how do we provide the implementation support so that all these pieces are operationalized and happening in our system in every school. And this is really just a high-level look at the team's work. I'll just let you have a quick view of it. Don't worry about capturing it all, because we're going to highlight them in more specific detail in a minute. But this is just really high-level look at some of the actions that have been implemented through this team's work, and as well other pieces that haven't been necessarily specifically part of this work, but that do connect to it. And my colleagues are going to take you on a much more fulsome tour of all of these. But for now, just wanted to give you that big picture of where we've been and where we're going. We're about on the third flag right now, moving forward to flag 4 in the very near future. So I'll just give you a second to have a look there. And lastly, if you want to keep going there, Christine, thanks so much. Just as we continue to have some of the background information before we dig into the specifics, we wanted you to know that with every decision and action that we've been doing, we've been trying to consider how those decisions and actions will be operationalized at each level of support along a tiered support model. So for example, what does monitoring and support look like at the tier 1 instructional level? And also, how does that same monitoring and support become that much more specific and frequent and intensive as we move up the tiers? And then also all the 3 documents that you're seeing here, actually 4, they're basically just summarizing how we and showing you how we shared this work with our system in the form of these issues or bulletins. And each one is going to share the key recommendations and resources and supports that we are recommending. And in many instances, these have been highlighting the evidence-based practices that were already in place and shining a new light on them. And in other ones, highlighting new actions and resources and strategies that have been put in place more recently by this team's work. And each one, just so you're all aware when you get the slides, each one is linked. If you click the actual image, and they're also in the slide notes. But like I said, my colleagues will take you through each one anyways, but they're available for you to peruse later.
Great, thank you, Jen. As literacy is a key factor in academic and future successes, the addressing learning recovery in early literacy was identified as a priority. We met as a group and brought together our ideas that would give direction to the system at both the K1, kindergarten grade 1, and grade 2 and 3 levels. And from that work, we started, as Jen mentioned, to create these issues. We have our monographs. So initially we started out with what was called looking at the first 30 days. And in that regard, we brought together ideas that contained immediate and practical supports, along with supports for transitions back to school and filters on how to look at that information. So within issue 1, we have the strategies for promoting re-engagement. We were looking at evidence-based practices to support all students, and really thinking as well about how to prioritize students who may have been impacted more so by the unequal schooling experiences over the past 2 years. We also looked at some assessment strategies and tools, and then we had some other filters where we have consideration for multilingual learners and students with special education needs as some of the key content from issue 1. When we look a little bit more closely at issue 1, the information is kind of set out into 4 areas in essence. We have the first section of knowing your learner, second section of supporting literacy learning, and we're really talking about that tier 1 instruction at this point. We also looked at, promoting learner engagement and also at ongoing assessment. And in those first 30 days, we wanted educators to be really mindful of that transition back to school and any other issues related to the students. And instead of jumping in and looking at students from a deficit lens or anything like that, what we wanted them to do is just look at students and notice or observe what was happening in the classroom. So here we're talking about noticing what's happening with reading as well as oral language development. And so there are points within each one that would guide the educators through specific things to be mindful of during that time. In addition, we have a section where we're looking at the supporting the literacy learning, as I mentioned previously. And within this, there's a focus on selecting learning goals and doing so at a grade level rather than looking to see the student's developmental level at that point in time, but using the grade level curriculum and providing scaffolding to support the students rather than, looking back at what may have been missed as a result of some of the time away from school or in different learning modes. And so we also were highlighting the use of high impact strategies and evidence-based strategies to support the learning in those first 30 days. In addition to the monograph or the information that was shared in issue number 1, there was some additional training that was provided, and schools were also provided with decodable texts in the kindergarten and grade 2 classrooms. There were some self-directed modules that were provided to unpack the strategies in issue 1. And as well, there was some learning related to Starting Strong in Literacy. It was the Starting Strong in Literacy series. It was provided through some summer learning in the form of the Summer Institute, as well as some fall offerings. Thank you.
So I continue on from there. Thank you, Lisa. So issue 2 went out around the end of October with a focus on professional learning and assessment while making connections between the assessment and responsive instruction using some of the resources that were highlighted in the first issue. Our first closer look highlights the current assessment support found in the Halton's Wheel of Emergent Reading Behaviors. It really cues the educator to think critically about a number of skills which are essential for students' early literacy development. And the areas are around the little circle graphic there. You can probably read them, but for clarity, the areas are phonological awareness, alphabetic principle, and phonics, oral communication and vocabulary, the writing connection, reading comprehension, and concepts of print. This is a previously created resource that continues to be refined, and it's one that we always like to bring educators back to because of the wealth of information that is in there. And it does support at the tier 1 level. The second highlight from issue 2 was something that we're really excited about this year because it's the introduction of Halton's Phonological Awareness Inventory. It's been newly created as a collaboration between our 2 departments with a lot of input from our SLP partners. The Halton Phonological Inventory is a tool that educators can use to provide insight into a student's learner profile and build a class profile that would really help inform the responsive instruction. So for example, some of the questions that you might have with a student are really specific to tasks. We might have on the list is compound word awareness. So we would have a blending task where I say 2 words, for example, starfish, and then ask the student to blend them together into the word starfish. Or the opposite, they might be segmenting a word. So what 2 words make up the word sunshine? and then they would respond with the 2 words. So by doing that kind of inventory and gathering the skills, it really allows the educator in the room to know who is working on what specific early literacy skills. With the release of Bulletin 2 also came some after-school professional development opportunities to dive deeper into decodable books and walk through an administration of the actual phonological inventory. So we actually had a real-time model of an adult with a child going through the whole assessment so that educators could really see the assessment in a wholesome way.
Thanks, Sherry. So that brings us now to issue 3, which came out in January. This gave educators some time to practice with the HDSB phonological awareness inventory in their classrooms. We affectionately refer to it as the PAI. And in issue 3, what we found is there needed to be some updates to the PAI. So this was released in that issue to allow for a quicker administration by an educator. Within this issue, there's also the Understanding, Teaching, and Monitoring Phonological Awareness Development document, and this contains additional guidance and support for interpreting results of the PAI and for connecting those results to next steps in instruction and programming using a tiered approach. Finally, this issue also highlights the upcoming professional learning opportunities for staff to further support educators in putting this information into practice in their classrooms. So the Understanding, Teaching, and Monitoring Phonological Awareness Development document, as you see here, it focuses on assessing and teaching to the HDSB PAI. The document includes information on when skills typically develop to provide a reference point for educators when considering individual development and to be able to recognize when a child would benefit from additional support. This chart clearly shows educators how to use the results from the PAI to inform their whole class, small group, and individual instruction. For instance, if a group of second-year kindergarten students struggled with segmenting compound words, a skill that typically develops in the first year of kindergarten, the educator would then consider completing some explicit instruction on how to segment these words with this group of students. So also included in the support document are the tiered strategies, resources, and school and system supports for phonological awareness instruction. Tier 1 includes high-impact strategies such as sound tubs, Alconin boxes, and interactive templates. When assessment data indicates that a student is not making progress despite focused Tier 1 instruction, educators can access the Tier 2, 3 intervention activities, videos, and teaching strategies from this document that Christine has put up here. All of these links will support more intensive, systematic, explicit intervention directly related to the student's development level. The videos depict small group lessons of educators teaching to specific skills, and the activity links are step-by-step lesson plans. Educators may follow the oh, sorry, Christine. Thank you. Almost done there. Educators may follow the problem-solving pathway to access some other Tier 2 human resource support, such as support from a CERT, learning resource teacher, or speech and language pathologist. Tier 3 support may include a referral to one of HDSB's programs or placements, if appropriate, such as KELP or ALPHA. Tier 2 and 3 support within the classroom is intensive, more explicit, precise, and personalized. Thanks, Christine.
Right, this is me. So this is back to sort of a pathway using the chevron. So this is a pathway to sort of where we've been and where we're looking to go, sort of as next steps. So as you see, we've walked through the different issues around the first 30 days, after the first 30 days, and certainly taken a closer look at the phonological awareness work that's happened. So some of our next steps include a closer look at phonics, as well as some other pieces. So we want to continue to do some professional learning to support teachers' knowledge of best practices regarding literacy development for their classrooms, and then CERT's understanding of how to help struggling students, making best use of our available resources in all their forms, so temporal, physical, as well as personnel resources. As well, we're working on developing and putting out to the system the phonics inventory, which would complete the picture that has been started by the phonological awareness inventory, because as we know, the ultimate goal of working on early literacy skills is to get to those individual sounds so that students are able to be manipulating and segmenting and blending those together for reading and writing. So certainly we want to be able to provide that inventory for teachers as well around that phonics inventory to complete the picture, and then obviously some ongoing professional development and support around the instruction, or again, how to analyze that data for teachers to better look at their responsive teaching practices for students that may be identified as struggling in those areas. We also want to dig deep into the highly anticipated recommendations of the Right to Read inquiry. And we did just sort of get a bit of a snippet yesterday through the release of the executive summary, but it'll be really great to be able to read all the 150 recommendations. We also want to possibly look at, so the Special Education Services Department has their IRTs, their intensive reading teachers working on their structured reading program, but they've been primarily working with older students, and we want to look at expanding that into some of the kindergarten and more elementary students. And also continuing on what, as Colette was saying, inviting somebody from the equity and achievement, equity and well-being, and looking at the intersectionality of those pillars that Colette and Jennifer spoke about, that intersectionality of learning, achievement, equity, and mental health and well-being. So again, still looking at that earlier and improved identification and intervention of learning challenges, which will lead to improved mental health. So having some people from the Student Wellbeing Department as well as the Equity Department sitting on our committee. And then we need to be looking at supporting some of our older students. So again, some of those students have been unevenly impacted by the changes in learning models over the last couple of years. And so whereas they might have been in our systems in kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2, now they're in grade 3 and grade 4 and grade 5. So we want to look at what does the support for those older students look like now that we've really had a chance to delve deeply into the kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2 type model. And with that, we have, oh, sorry, Colette, go ahead.
Nope, you go ahead. Oh, are you going to move on to your, okay, so if we could just pause there. Thanks, yes. Christine. And I do want, at the risk of tooting our own horns, I do want to really acknowledge the work not only of the folks that are here with us this evening, but the rest of the team who is not here. It has been exciting work. At times it's been really challenging, really intense and philosophical discussions around what learning looks like, which have really pushed us to really kind of dive deep into this work and to land where we've landed, which I think is in a really strong place. And I'm really proud of the work of our two departments. So kudos to the team. And with that, I'd like to open it up to anyone for questions.
Does anyone have any questions at this time? I can probably start. Obviously, you know, as the Learning Disabilities Association, it's wonderful to see the progress that's being made. And as you say, the Right to Read report was, I think, is going to be a seminal time in education in Ontario. And a lot of what you've presented tonight form the basis of what's in that report. So that's wonderful to see. Obviously, a lot from my perspective, a lot of it comes down to the professional development that will be given to the educators particularly at the K-2 level, where we're trying to get that early intervention. Obviously, you've got quite a bit. Can you just expand a little bit about how much professional development you see being given to our regular kindergarten teachers, who are the ones that are actually at the forefront?
Absolutely, and I'm going to ask someone from School Programs Department to start us off with that.
I can jump in and start. Good evening, everyone. I think that as we now we have the recommendations and we need to look at them closely. We're also going to be anticipating changes from the Ministry of Education. There are great calls for change to curriculum, change to resource documents, recommendations for programs to be used, all of those things. So I anticipate that there will be a great deal of professional development that will be happening based on all of those things for our K-2 educators now. And as well, a part of the recommendations are for teachers coming from the faculties of education to also be receiving professional development as well. So, but we're a bit ahead of the game, I think, in Halton, and kudos to not Colette and myself, but to our teams for getting this work started. And we're really proud of the work that's been started. So we're not going to wait, for the ministry. We're going to do what we can now to get started in terms of moving forward. And we already have. We do have a challenge in terms of release time and those kinds of things, in terms of being able to provide any professional development in the system right now during the school day because of fill rates for absences for illness and COVID related absences. But we're hoping that as we move forward that some of those things will certainly improve so that we can start. But our plan is to get ahead of the game because we know that it will take some time for the ministry to digest the recommendations as well. And Jennifer, I invite you to add anything from programs point of view that I haven't said.
Sure. I can maybe speak to a little bit of the work that has been ongoing. Maybe I'll just specifically speak to this year. We don't want to go too far back. Despite the challenges of the fill rates and resources to be able to do job embedded learning, we have looked for every opportunity to do some of this work as well as we can. So some of the modes of that learning have been everything from meeting with teachers to support them one-on-one and providing some one-on-one coaching in foundational skill development, as well as professional learning modules where educators can choose to take this learning on their own and do anytime, any place, just in time kind of learning, as well as we've continued to run after school sessions, before school sessions, probably at the rate of 1 or 2 a week, depending on the specific audience and content. And again, those have been optional for educators as we haven't been able to do them during the school day. But all of that work is ongoing rather than waiting until we have the perfect professional learning supports in place. So that's where we are right now.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? Catherine.
I was just wondering, first of all, what does IPL stand for?
It stands for Instructional Program Leader. So we have instructional program leaders in school programs, in special education services, as well as our equity department. So it's not unique to a department, but an instructional program leader can live in many departments in our board.
Okay. Our board is called instructional coach, so I was wondering. So how is this for, like, say, deaf and hard of hearing kids who have a harder time hearing the sounds, and how would that approach be for them? If that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Sean, I think, might be the best to jump in, or Christine, if you have a thought. Either of you can go ahead.
I can jump in, and then Christine can follow up. So working with our deaf hard of hearing team, we have 6 itinerant resource teachers there, plus itinerant EAs working specifically with students with hearing impairment. So they would be going in and supporting the classroom teacher in those pieces. And given that it's a spectrum of needs for those students, depending on their level of hearing, the responses would be appropriate to the individual student. So it'd be more of an individualized response.
And I would say too, just as a continuation on that, the more we could ground the work, so we can help the students hear how the sounds are made and emphasize how the sounds are made, and then help tie that to the text so that they're able to make that connection and make it. And the more explicit we can make that, right, and the more systematic we can make that teaching, it will also benefit the students who have hearing impairments. So I think that is certainly an approach we've considered when we are undertaking this work, because the research really shows us that best practices are applicable to all our students, whether they're the students with any kind of cognitive impairments, or they're students with learning disabilities, students with hearing impairments. The same kind of approach, especially if we do it in a systematic way, and we're monitoring frequently and doing all those other good pieces in responsive teaching, that will benefit all the students. So certainly deaf and hard of hearing would be included in that group as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions at this time? Okay, well, we're actually going to move on to another presentation related to this topic, which is the KELP and ALPHA programs. So again, I'd love to welcome the team and hear about how these programs are progressing.
Great, thank you. And in some regards, this presentation is a bit of I'll say a continuation or an offshoot from the previous presentation. And as Sandra was previewing in the previous presentation, she was talking about some of the Tier 3 supports that are available in the Halton District School Board. And two of those tiered supports are what we have as the Kindergarten Expressive Language and Literacy Program and the Expressive Language and Phonological Awareness class, which we term or we refer to as the KELP and ALPHA in our board. And our KELP program is a half-year program for students in year 2 of kindergarten, and they actually attend the program for 9 weeks, but they attend their homeschool on alternating weeks. So they'll come to KELP for 1 week and back to the homeschool the following week, back to KELP and then homeschool, and they alternate through those 18 weeks. Whereas our ALPHA class, we have the students in the classroom for the full year. Both of the programs are supported by a classroom teacher with special education qualifications, and that teacher receives support through the speech language pathologist, as do the students. In KELP, we have it is a program, whereas ALPHA is a placement. And in the program, we have a specific goal setting report, as well as a final report that discusses the progress for each student. And in the ALPHA, we have all of the students go through identification, placement, and review committee to receive their identification and subsequent placement. And they have an IEP in place for the year. As I mentioned, our KELP is for students in year 2 of kindergarten, and ALPHA is for students in grade 1. There are a lot of similarities between the two. Both of the classes have a maximum of 10 students. And the main similarities actually comes out in the profile of the students. And when we think about our KELP and ALPHA students, all of the students have demonstrated needs in the areas of oral language expression and early literacy. Some of those students may have some challenges with their articulation, or they haven't fully developed age-appropriate articulation skills at that point in time. In general, the students have average receptive language or average comprehension of language. However, with the students in KELP, they sometimes have a bit of a challenge with their comprehension And since it's not a placement, we have a bit more flexibility in that regard. So essentially, we'll see children or hear children who don't sound like their peers in terms of the oral language that they use. They're not at the same level in terms of their early literacy. And as well, they may have some of those articulation challenges that I mentioned previously. I'll turn it over to Sherry to continue.
Thanks, Lisa. So if you were to walk into a KELP class, you would find an inviting space that supports the 4 frames of the kindergarten program. You'd also see some direct and systematic instruction of early literacy skills that follow our KELP scope and sequence that we wrote over the summer as a team. At a different time, students might be exploring an area of interest or building their social skills. And you could then find some students off to the side working one-on-one with either the teacher or the SLP, targeting an area of need that's specific to that child. Throughout the day, oral language plays a large role and is continuously modeled. So even in just general conversations, you might see or hear a teacher modeling the correct usage of pronouns or prepositions. So saying that is correct. She is under, so emphasizing the 2 words, the table. Or you might see a read aloud followed by an oral sequencing activity. In an ALPHA class, you would observe a number of similarities with some of the skills being targeted just a little further along in the literacy and language continuum. But a number of exact same type of activities. We also have a scope and sequence that we wrote in the summer for the ALPHA class. Thanks. Both classes follow scope and sequence and make use of structured literacy resources. These are little individual pictures of some that we use. So Haggerty is a daily phonological word activity. It's the top one with a book that flips open and gives a list of words that the teachers follow. So it's direct and systematic. It builds upon the skills. Another one is a comprehensive lessons from Flyleaf. So it's not just the decodable books, which the system has available to them, but it's the manuals and binders that actually have the step-by-step lessons for the teachers to follow. So the skills are really built systematically and sequentially. Some new tools that we've added, one on this screen, is the tools for reading lips. And that provides support for place, manner, and voice so that students can learn how to properly make the sounds. It's important to note that a number of these resources are being used. We heard about the structured literacy teachers working with LD students, and a number of these resources are also ones that they use. So they're going over in between the different programs. So Wilson Foundations on the screen is one that we use, but the itinerant teachers use the Wilson books also for the older students. We can flip to the next one, Christine. So these are some more materials that we purchased. Thank you, Colette. And the highlight on this page for me is the sound system that's there. So it is so that ensures that what is being spoken is heard clearly throughout the whole class. It has a pendulum mic for the teacher, but it also includes a handheld mic for the students. So if they're giving a response, and the sound quality on them is fantastic. We put a lot into both the KELP and ALPHA programs over this past year. So ongoing goal is our social emotional development. And so some tools have been provided, but it would be a goal to continue to work on. And then we've also provided a lot of rich read alouds that are culturally responsive and also link to curriculum. Capacity building is a budding goal for us this year, and we hope that to continue with it. So this year in KELP, we've used the student turnaround time. So when we flip between the first term and second term, to share information with classroom teachers and CERTs. We've actually done Google Meets with them so that they hear the feedback. The KELP teachers have also started using Google Classroom to actually share examples of what is going on in the classroom in terms of skills and activities. And that can be accessed by the parents of the students, the educators of the students, or the support in the student's homeschool. So the CERT or the classroom teachers. And what our hope is, by doing that, then on those off weeks, some of those skills can continue to be practiced and the skills generalized to different settings. All our teachers have an open door and policy to share when people walk by and are kind of interested in what goes on in that small little class. So there's mentorship going on between some of our teachers and other teachers in the school, which we want to have and would love to foster more of. All our students leave with a report of skills that were targeted and some next steps to continue with connections and potential supports from the homeschool SLP as another way of sharing the important work that's being done. So even if they can't be followed when they return from, they say, ALPHA in grade 2, you at least know that that's a resource to be reached out to your homeschool SLP, just to say, hey, here's where the student left off in ALPHA. What would you consider as next steps? So those are some of our capacity building.
So the next slide is one that encompasses one of the views of reading that has actually been highly espoused during the science of reading discussion as per the Right to Read inquiry, and it's the simple view of reading. And so what it does is it talks about both the decoding abilities of the students as well as their language skills. So they talk about the decoding multiplied by the language comprehension actually leads to your reading comprehension score. So where you can have students that are very strong in decoding, such as some of our newly arrived to Canada students who actually have been instructed or are able to read in their own languages and understand how to crack that code. Some of them might be strong in decoding, but they're still on their development of some of the language, some vocabulary, some understanding, some of their structures of language, and so their reading comprehension would be low, not because that there's any kind of difficulty with those students in terms of their learning abilities, but they just haven't had that exposure yet. And on the other side of things, we have kids like some of our LD kids who are struggling with the decoding aspect of reading, but they do actually have very good language comprehension. And so that's why when we read to them or expose them to some of those texts, they actually are able to still gain the knowledge from that. And we would certainly encourage them to be exposed to those high level texts to keep them at grade level and to build their vocabulary and their complex language structures. But they're struggling with that decoding component. So even though they have good language comprehension, they still result in having reading comprehension difficulties. What we know about the students in the KELP and ALPHA program in class is that those students struggle actually with both sides of that. So they're struggling not only with the decoding, because we know based on assessment and screening that has been done in their home schools that they are struggling with acquiring those early literacy skills and that really systematic method to break the code to help them learn how to read. But they are also struggling not so much with the comprehension of language, except some of those kids do have some challenges with that, but they also struggle with vocabulary, with syntax and morphology. So their use of language is impaired, and then that in turn impacts their language comprehension when they're reading. So we know it's not enough to only target just their decoding, for example, but we know we also need to target that language comprehension in order to move those students along in terms of impacting their overall reading comprehension. So in those starbursts, you can see that those programs, Heggerty, Flyleaf, and Tools for Reading, for example, are programs that specifically, systematically, explicitly, and intensively target that decoding aspect of the side of the simple view of reading. But then the other stuff, the read aloud, some oral language goals and programming, those social emotional materials, we've got conversation starters cards, all of those pieces as well as others then target that language comprehension side of things, so that we know we have a balanced approach to improving the overall reading comprehension skills of the students in KELP and ALPHA. When we look at the newly released Right to Read, again, some of the snippets we've been able to glean from the executive summary, we find that, not unintentionally, our programs are aligned with the recommendations. So, we took what we knew about what these students who are coming into our KELP and ALPHA classes are needing to be successful, and it's certainly aligned with, as Sherry hinted at in the presentation you heard previously from the IRTs in special education, who are really focusing on some of the same kinds of things with our LD learners. So we intentionally have aligned those two programs, this one as a more of an early intervention and prevention program, and then align that with the same kind of recommendations. And so we see reflected in our programming a lot of these recommendations that are just starting to come out from the Right to Read inquiry. So that idea of the explicit, systematic, and direct instruction and foundational word reading, that clear evidence that we need to impact both sides of that simple view of reading, the ability to read words, not just the knowledge of the skills that go into that word reading, but also the automaticity, which will lead to better fluency for those students and improved comprehension, but also that good oral language use and comprehension that will help improve the reading comprehension. It talks about the screening. So in KELP specifically, we are screening as the students come into KELP, and then again at the end of the term, so that we're screening those twice a year. And then in ALPHA, we have ongoing screening or assessment on those students to set IEP goals and to be able to report back on the goals that were set in the IEP, which definitely include both oral language and phonological awareness. Obviously, one of the recommendations too would not just be to be targeting screening, but as Jen was saying, we have to also put practice. We have to put our knowledge into practice and provide that intervention. And so one of the recommendations is to get those children into immediate effective evidence-based interventions. And that's what we do feel KELP and ALPHA does, is that gets those students early into some of those effective evidence-based interventions that we know, because we know that they are at risk of failing because they have both the concerns on the oral language side as well as the learning to read side. And then that every school has at least one evidence-based tier 2 and tier 3, greater intensity reading intervention for students in the grades that need them, which is certainly what we think we're providing in the KELP and ALPHA classes. And then we're also having ongoing PD with our teachers in those classes, in the KELP and ALPHA classes, to form that professional development, to make sure that they're knowledgeable and have the skills that they need to be able to develop, to deliver those programs to those students.
Thank you, Christine. So here we just have a little sample of some of the data that we're tracking in KELP. We'll have similar data for ALPHA. We're fortunate that we have gone through the first term this year, so we've had a start and a finish to the KELP class, whereas with the ALPHA placement, we will have our final assessment towards the end of the school year. But at any rate, based on the information that's being gathered this year, what we can say through review and analysis is that, so here's how the students, this small group of students came into KELP on their initial assessment. This represents the number of skills in terms of their phonological awareness upon entry. So when they were first assessed, that's what they looked like. And following their 9 weeks of instruction in the program, as I said, it's spread out over 18 weeks because they attend their homeschool on opposite weeks. The bars in blue are representative of the skills they entered the program with, and the bars in red are the skills that they acquired in addition to those skills they showed up with. And so what we can see here is that on average, and the trends are similar in the other data that we've looked at as well, the students are gaining an average of 7 skills during their time in the program. So over those 9 weeks of in-class KELP time, 18 weeks in total. And at least 50% of the class made gains in all areas of phonological awareness that was measured. And that even included some of the skills that were not directly taught. And as I said, in terms of ALPHA, we don't have the final data because that will come out later in the year. But in discussion with the classroom teachers and looking at some assessment probes and such, they're seeing the similar trend in terms of students picking up on those skills. And when we think about what students are learning and what's happening here, since they're learning how to manipulate the code and looking at the building blocks, once they learn how to do this explicitly in one position, it can often carry over into other positions as well as other skills. And in terms of KELP, given the length of the program, not all skills that are measured on that phonological awareness assessment were able to be taught in that short period of time directly to the students. But this would explain, if we looked at the data, why some students did not make gains in skills that weren't taught. But as we said earlier, that we did see some evidence of skills developing even when they weren't taught. When we compare the students in KELP and ALPHA who came in to the programs, they're significantly delayed in all areas of oral language as well as early literacy to their same aged peers. And we can do that based on the Halton District School Board Phonological Awareness Inventory that was referenced in the earlier presentation. We can see that if that was the measure we used for all of these students, they would not have passed the inventory at the time that they were coming into the program. But if they were assessed now for this group of students who are currently who have just been discharged from the program, they would now be seen as successful. So they've made some nice gains in terms of what was acquired in the program that actually shows that they're in line with what would be expected at this point in time in their home school. And furthermore, since the Halton District School Board Phonological Awareness Inventory is intended to be a quick screening tool, and the ALPHA and KELP classes are intended to focus on the skills in at-risk learners, the measurement tool that we use in KELP and ALPHA looks a little bit different from the Halton District School Board Phonological Awareness Inventory. And the reason for that is we are looking at more discrete and expanded skills, again, because these children are identified as at risk and they weren't able to just pick up on the information like the majority of their peers were able to do in their regular classrooms. So they needed to have that direct instruction in specific areas to be able to pick that up. And our assessment data also shows that these students, as I said, have not picked up from the generalized exposure. And that's in line with what we know about the profile of these students. And finally, we know that these students have oral language delays, which will also affect their ability to comprehend what they read. And we're also focused on developing those skills to improve their overall literacy abilities, some of which Christine mentioned earlier in her slide. So one of the things that our KELP teachers had done was provided a parent survey. So we were looking for some feedback on the program, and we have a Wordle here that just kind of highlights some of the information that was shared back with us. And I think just by looking at I'll let you have a quick second to sneak a peek. The things that really stand out was that it was a very positive experience. The majority of parents reported an increase in confidence in their children. They discussed improved clarity, whether it was in their speech or their language, and also improved organization in terms of the way they were able to share information with others, including storytelling, that's highlighted as well. And they noted the gains in phonological awareness abilities. And I just pulled out a few of the comments that I will share with you. One parent reflected confidence in abilities to produce rhymes, syllables, and an eagerness to spell words. The parents felt it provided a more comfortable environment for their child to be able to express himself, and the class provided targeted activities to practice and enhance his verbal skills, which contributed to a noticeable increase in his self-confidence and desire to work and improve on both his strengths and weaknesses. Another family was very grateful for the program and having their son have the opportunity to grow and learn so much. Another parent shared that they couldn't recommend the program enough and that they really appreciated the program, and the small class size and focused attention really benefited their daughter immensely. So those were just some of the responses that were received. So I'll turn it back over to Christine to continue on.
Sorry, I forget to turn my microphone back on. So when we're looking at next steps, because certainly, as we were alluding to, this program's kind of been in development for a few years, but just recently we've really been able to put the resources in place and really develop that scope and sequence and really help the teachers in those programs understand, because it really is a very different way of supporting oral language than teachers are typically used to, and some of the training that they've received. So we get that feedback frequently from them, and certainly around the way we're supporting the reading development. So we are continuing to do that ongoing professional development with the teachers around the science of reading, as well as how to help their students develop in their oral language areas through some of that more informal stuff that Sherry was talking about, those read alouds, how to target some of those skills during read alouds, and then certainly during the coaching and modeling all through the day. So in instructor times when they're standing in lines, but then also how to embed that oral language, especially that oral language, the oral language components of the curriculum throughout all the areas of the curriculum. So even if you're working on math, really focusing on some of that oral language, and then embedding some of the big ideas from, the social studies curriculum, for example, and the science curriculum. So really embedding and really focusing on that oral language component. Also having the KELP and ALPHA teachers, as Sherry was alluding to as well, especially for the KELP teachers in that turnaround time, but having the KELP and ALPHA teachers really share their knowledge with not only the staff in their own buildings, but the staff in the schools of the home schools of the students who are attending their programs. Again, that idea of sharing information on the Google Classroom that the parents can take advantage of, as well as the students' homeschool teachers and the CERTs. And then we also want to put together a resource for the parents to really understand the approach we're taking in the class and the materials we're using in the class and how those relate to the profiles of their students and are meeting their students' needs. And then also that ongoing connection. So we have regular meetings with the administrators in the schools that have the KELP and ALPHA classes and programs, so that they are able to understand, again, the profile, the program, the resources, and then how the teachers in those classes can be resources to the entire their entire class, or sorry, their entire school, as well as how they can help support the teachers in those classes as well. So that's one thing that we want to keep going with. And then in terms of reflections and considerations, so since the introduction of KELP and the new ALPHA program, we have actually not had, unfortunately, one full uninterrupted school year. So we did get one term of KELP in, but even that, there was an interruption in January. So we're really looking forward to a full uninterrupted school year. And especially since the introduction of the new resources, we've really only had one term of KELP and half a year in ALPHA. COVID, as we know, has forced changes in models, pivoting throughout the school year, and has also made it difficult for us to collect data. It's also made it difficult, obviously, to do that ongoing PD that's necessary, not just during COVID, but we also had some sanctions issues a couple years ago. So that's been another limitation for our PD. Unfortunately, we've actually had a high staff turnover in our KELP and ALPHA classes. We've had a few teachers who were into those positions as new teachers, and they took new positions outside of the board, or they've taken new positions within the board. And we also right now have a teacher on a maternity leave. So those have resulted in ongoing turnover of teachers, and then the ongoing need for training, especially, as I was saying, since some of those ways of supporting the learning are new to some of the teachers, or a different way of thinking about how they do the responsive teaching. The good news that we feel, though, is that as students have access to KELP, and then some of the work that's been done around the phonological awareness inventory and some of that responsive and direct teaching that's happening in the Tier 1 through the program department, we should see students coming in to our classes into ALPHA with higher levels of base level phonological awareness skills. So should they continue to need the support from their oral language or even from their literacy, because that's a constantly moving bar. So should they need to continue to go into ALPHA after KELP, and then coming into KELP, we should be able to see where the teachers are able to start and then move those students farther along. And so we can start our responsive teaching practices farther along that phonological awareness continuum in order to further their progress, close the gaps, again, build that essential confidence in the students so that they are able to see themselves as communicators, readers, and writers, and as participants in their classrooms, families, and peer groups, and to give them the skills they can use so they can use them independently to continue on their learning journeys. So we're quite excited about this, but we're still quite in the stage of reflection and constant analysis of the data to make sure that we're responsive to the ongoing needs of the students within the classroom.
Great, thank you very much for a very in-depth presentation. Sophia, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, ladies. That was great. I'm just wondering if, and my apologies again if you mentioned this, but what type of profile are you looking for when you're selecting students for this program? And again, naturally, I'm representing, the Halton Down Syndrome Association. So I'm thinking of our kids who all struggle with reading, decoding, with all of that. So just wondering, would our kids fit that profile to make it into one of these programs?
Sorry, I was falling asleep at the wheel here thinking Christine would just jump right in, but Christine, by all means, jump right in.
I can. When we're considering the programs, we have a number of programs within the Halton District School Board, and certainly the communication program is one where we look at meeting the needs of students, and we again looking at the overall communication as well as their literacy development as they're able to, and again we also have speech and language pathologists and the IPLs working together also as we look at some of our self-contained programs in terms of the life skills classes. So again, we're aware that we need to be, again, if we're thinking about the simple view of reading where we have language comprehension plus their decoding skills leading to their reading comprehension skills, we should be considering the overall needs of our students, even who have some of the cognitive impairments that we are seeing, so that their reading levels are consistent with their ability levels. And so currently the students with really significant comprehension challenges as measured on some of our formalized assessment tools, because we have to really look at who would be best able to take advantage of such a short-term program. KELP is only 9 weeks in length, and then ALPHA really is only 1 year. It moves at quite a rapid pace. It would be, I think, a challenging program for some of those students, but I think as we continue to refine our practices to support all the needs of all the students across the system and look at really responsive teaching practices to meet all the needs of our students, we should find that your students, for example, with Down syndrome are being met in those other programs, but currently that's not, the Down syndrome profile is not typically one that would fit the profile for KELP or ALPHA.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, Christine, like one of the challenges, when Rebecca and I take some of these great things that we hear at our meetings back to our association, one of the things that parents challenge us on is that that's great. The board's doing all these great things, but none of those things are targeting our students and our learners. And our kids are not benefiting from any of these programs. And we honestly don't know what to tell them. So we come back to you and, obviously bring their voices here and say, it sounds like there's great PD for staff. Why don't we think out of the box and perhaps invite some of our life skills teachers to that PD so they also can learn some of these great strategies? Because I'll tell you, these life skills programs are full of our students who are struggling to read and to decode and to really understand. And these comprehension skills are really, they desperately need them because as they get ready to move into high school, like I said, they're still really, really behind, right? And many of them are in mainstream classrooms that are struggling. So I do think that when we have all these great strategies, rather than minimize the exposure to just the staff in these programs, I think it would be really beneficial to those life skills program teachers, as well as any teachers they may have a child with Down syndrome or any other learning need, right? That may not fit the profile for this program, but again, would really benefit from that.
For sure, and we
those
certainly have a
skills.
number of Down syndrome students in our communication programs. So certainly we definitely are looking at that, and that's certainly a profile of student that benefits from our communication program. And the approach we're taking, again, is consistent. As I was alluding to earlier, the consistent, explicit approach for teaching reading would be applicable to all our students. So deaf and hard of hearing, certainly the kids with cognitive impairments, and then certainly the kids with the learning challenges. And we haven't brought it here yet, but actually there is a committee right now doing a book study, actually. The book is called, oh, I had it in front of me and now I don't. It's
Comprehensive Literacy for All.
Yeah, Comprehensive Literacy for All, including students with significant learning challenges.
Yeah, see, like that sounds amazing. Honestly,
Yeah.
like I really would like a follow-up on this, ladies. And just because like I'm gonna hold you guys accountable, okay?
Sure.
Because we're being to be honest, our associations are holding us accountable, and I'm embarrassed because I really don't have anything to take to them concrete. And they ask us, what's happening with our kids? Like you've been telling us this for 3-4 years that the board is doing these great things, but our kids are not benefiting from that. And now
We
many of
hold
these
ourselves
kids.
accountable.
That's great. That's great. No, you do, and we hold you in high esteem. We know that you're there for our kids and helping them. But again, like I'm saying, that I joined SEAC, almost 4 years ago now, and in that time, to be honest, I can't say we've made huge gains for our community of learners with Down syndrome, and many of them, like I said, like they're in middle school, they're grade 6, 7, and 8, and still struggling with reading and comprehension. Not because they don't have the ability to get there, but because there really hasn't been any targeted intervention for them. And honestly, it's frustrating. Those years are not going to come back, right? They're moving along, and they're not getting the help that they need. So I applaud the board for these programs. It's amazing, but it's really, I think our kids have been let down, and there's major gaps. And I really would like to see some of these teachers in these life skills contained programs getting some of that PD, right? So they can also share that with their students.
Oh, you're on
Alison,
mute.
you're muted.
Sorry. Colette, do you want to add to that?
I would love to, and thank you, Sophia, for raising that. I think what you're highlighting speaks really clearly and nicely to the tiers of intervention that was presented in the first presentation, which I'm not sure if I know you came in late, so you may have missed that part of the presentation, but really a focus on this evidence-based systems way of teaching early literacy and having a tiered intervention in every school. And I'm going to ask Sean to speak about the role of our CERTs in this work and how our CERTs may support that tiered intervention.
Thank you. So I want to say it was in September, I think it was September, when our reading specialists did their presentation on the work we've been doing with the structured reading. So part of their role is also to build the capacity of our staff and our CERTs in schools around some of the strategies involved with this to support students in the classrooms. So we have been changing some of the way the model is working so that they have more time to provide supports for CERTs, giving them specific instructions around the Kilpatrick model, some of the training we've been doing, it's called LIPS, so that the CERTs can go in and support students with different exceptionalities, but in some cases we are working with students with Down syndrome and seeing how effective our model is and what changes we can make to further support those students. So things are happening. We're learning as we're going along how the model works and how we can better support it. As you know, it's only been in its first year, but we're excited by the results. So it's an expanding piece, and my hope is that you'll be able to go back to your parents. We'll be able to go back to our families and say, here are the things we're providing now through our staff in the schools.
Yeah, and that's really nice to hear, and for sure I will. I do remember that presentation, and that was one of the ones that I took back very excitedly, only to hear from parents that, okay, well, how is this benefiting my kid? I haven't, a couple of them actually asked their CERTs about that, and the CERTs had not been part of that training. So is that optional training for CERTs or mandatory training?
I'll let Colette say that at this point, but it's right now, it's optional is not the right word. It's voluntary, and it's supported training. So we're limited by time, and I appreciate that that the families see the SEAC, and it's great that you're sharing this information and that our families are watching SEAC presentations and are excited by this. But the implementation time is not as quickly as a couple of months and we can get everybody in the system trained. But we're working in a very tight timeline to make this happen as quickly as possible. And I can tell you that the staff in schools are excited by this as well. They're asking for it. So we're working as fast as we can while we continue to support the students in the programs that are already part of the initiative, expanding it as well. So
no, absolutely. Like the program sounds amazing. And like I said, like so many families that I shared this with were very excited about it. I guess they were sort of like, okay, well, when do we get in on this? Like, how is that going to work? And naturally, like to roll it out in a board as big as Halton, it does take time, but so good to know that the sorts are getting training. My other question was that there are other really good resources. And again, sorry, I'm going to talk about our association, but teaching kids with Down syndrome how to read. Like there's a lot of research that tells us they don't learn phonetically, they learn by, sight words. So are we sort of including research from all avenues when we are looking at this reading program? Because there's strategies that work with different groups of learners, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I see Christine is nodding as well, so I'll let her weigh in. But I will tell you that we have a number of our IPLs who support our life skills classes as well, looking at other means of supporting reading in those classes and for students that fit those profiles. So we're not just limiting ourselves to one facet. We're looking at multiple facets in order to reach as many students, if not all of our students, that we can.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so like I was saying, we're trying to look at some book studies, look at the research that shows what our best practices for. We've had students come from McMaster University into the speech and language department. We've had them because we have limited access to journals. So we've been asking them to do research into the best practices that fit all the models of students.
That's great.
We
yeah.
certainly want to use evidence-based best practices so that we're putting our effort, because again, training everybody takes a long time and it's hard to do that PD. So we want to make sure we're giving them the best high yield evidence-based strategies that we can to do that. So certainly we're definitely looking at the evidence about what works best for the population of kids we're trying to service.
Perfect. I will take that back. Thank you, guys.
So I just had one quick question. You mentioned that every school will have at least one evidence-based tier 2 or tier 3 program. Could you just clarify what that actually means? I'm sure you went through it, but I kind of lost it in the thing. So which programs will they actually have, or which access to support will there be at every school?
Sorry, I'm sorry if I confused that. That was just one of the recommendations out of the right to read.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Good.
Where KELP and ALPHA fit into that in terms of, so I'm sorry if I confused that. That was just one of the recommendations, and we felt like the KELP and ALPHA program was in line with that tier 2 and 3 evidence-based program for intervention. So I'm sorry if I made that.
No. So ultimately, your hope is that obviously this program will be rolled out and it will be available, because obviously the numbers are not high right now. We're looking at 10, there were 5 schools, 10 in ALPHA. I mean, I know that finances are tight, but I presume that obviously if this program is doing well and is seeing the gains that you're benefiting, and assuming the ministry starts to follow the recommendations of the right to read, and there is increased finances put towards support, that there will be kind of, the aim is to have more of these interventions at each school so that the children don't actually have to move to other programs in other schools.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in here. So that, as Christina said, is one of the recommendations in the right to read, that every school has tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. In the plan that we have laid out in our first presentation, we have illustrated the tiers of instruction and intervention that are available to all students. There are tier 2 and tier 3 supports available in every school, but then within the tier, there are even more precise, such as the KELP and ALPHA classes, which are offered, kind of in a centralized location. We do offer the classes based on demand. And so we don't turn kids who meet the criteria away. We expand the number of classes that are offered. But if I could have Sean or Sandra or Sherry speak to some of the examples of those tiered interventions that we've outlined in that first presentation that we did, that speaks to all schools.
I'm happy to hand it over to Sandra or Sherry, as they were the ones working on the Tier 2 interventions.
Sherry, would you like me to jump in here?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So some of the Tier 2 interventions include some human resources supports, which means the CERTs, the learning resource teachers, which are part of school program departments, as well as our speech and language pathologists, because they play a big role in supporting students with early literacy as well. So that's the human resources side. So that includes some of that professional development that we have to make sure is moving forward. And for our CERT, that's part of CERT learning. And we have weekly CERT learning after school sessions, because right now we can't meet in person. And this is part of that, to help the CERTs. What can they do to support in these classrooms? Where can they provide some of the support? And that guide that we showed you with all those links in it, that has those Tier 2 and 3 interventions specific to each skill, that's something that we've provided to the system, including the CERTs. And how can you go into a classroom and teach a small group or an individual, depending on what the level of support is that they need, using some of those activities and videos to support in the classroom. The other thing that is happening, as was spoken about by Lisa, in Tier 1 interventions, which also lead into the Tier 2 and Tier 3, is that we have these decodable texts now available within the schools, which is excellent. So we're working with CERTs as well. How can you work with these decodable texts in the classrooms? We also have programs, if a student has had testing and had a private psych ed assessment or a psych ed assessment within the school board and received a diagnosis of a learning disability, though the CERTs can access Lexia and work with the students using Lexia as a Tier 2 or Tier 3 support for those students as well. I don't know if I'm missing anything. Sean or Sherry, if you'd like to jump in, please do.
And I wonder if I could ask Tina or Jen to speak about the LRT, because that might be a new support staff that SEAC hasn't heard about, but that is a staff that lives within the school programs department that supports literacy.
Yeah, thanks, Colette. I can begin by saying that, yes, we have learning resource teachers that have been running programs in schools for a number of years that have led many kids to success. Given the recommendations from the Right to Read Commission, we might make some changes to the role of the LRT and the resources that they use, certainly. So I would say that would be an important piece moving forward. However, we have had success with the LLI program that the LRTs have been primarily using for approximately 80% of students in the HDSB to date. But I think that these recommendations that we're coming to learn now will lead us to take a look at that program and to see how we can change the role of the LRT and make some changes in keeping with the recommendations. Jen, do you want to add anything?
Sure. So my colleagues and I, part of our role is to support the learning resource teachers in their work. And we support them in maximizing the half day where they're not working directly with students, but also the half day where they're working in the coaching capacity with educators. A lot of their time is spent in K-2 classrooms. And for that reason, a lot of the work that we support them in is deepening their own learning around those foundational skills, around phonological awareness, around phonics, around fluency and word reading, as well as comprehension and writing and vocabulary. So it's kind of an indirect way to support all teachers who would like to engage in coaching, and that happens in job embedded in the classroom. And we're planning to continue in that work as we look at, like Tina said, as we look at perhaps changes to the other half of their role.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, we've obviously had a very fulsome discussion, so we will move on at this stage. Oh, is that a hand up?
Just me jumping in. So I just
okay, yep.
want to thank the staff who've
Yep.
joined us tonight, Sandra, Lisa, Sherry, Jen, Tina, Christine. We so appreciate you joining us. Hopefully you all heard our passion for this work, and we are really excited about growing the work and growing this partnership. And so by all means, you are all welcome to stay, but you are also welcome to leave. So don't feel you need to hang out for the rest of this agenda. But I do really appreciate you joining us, as well as those who aren't with us tonight, but have been key players in this work. And of course, most importantly, a heartfelt thanks to our educators who are leading this work in the classroom and really making a difference for kids. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Colette. And yes, on behalf of SEAC, I'd like to thank you for what has been obviously a massive amount of work. There's obviously lots more to go with the right to read, but obviously well on the way to making some really great strides forward. So thank you again on behalf of SEAC and all of our children who need your support. Thank you. So at this time, we're going on to a discussion question period. Are there any specific questions that anybody has at this time? Okay, not seeing. Oh, did I just hear a?
Sorry, that's me, Sophia. I had to log in with my daughter's account.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah.
Just a quick question about the tiered slides. I know you did mention we're going to get that. Is that going to be emailed to us sort of sooner rather than later? Because we had some parents that were asking.
By all means, we're happy to circulate that by the end of the week.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Lorna will send that out?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Colette.
Great. So we're now at item 4.0, communications to SEAC. So we'll start with superintendent's report. Everybody received a copy of Colette's report, but Colette, if you can give us a brief update and see if there's any questions.
By all means. So as you likely know, we have received the budget from the Ministry of Education. I think this is the earliest ever, so we're quite excited to get it this early. The technical papers are anticipated to be released after March break, which is really where we get the very specifics around the funding envelopes. And so we'll be looking to those technical papers to really guide our budget process as we move forward in the coming months. It's possible now that the GSNs are out early, that Superintendent Nagoy will be coming a little earlier than anticipated. I think in recent time it's been in June, and so we're likely going to see her come in May or even earlier, depending on her revised timelines. So the budget survey was released to all of you as well as to our community, and so certainly there's an opportunity to provide input through that budget survey. As part of the ministry's release and announcement, we are required to run the remote learning option for parents for another school year in both elementary and secondary. And so we're currently developing the models for what that remote learning will look like in both elementary and secondary panels. And we will likely have information out to families really soon, hopefully before March break, but if not before March break, certainly right after March break, because the planning for the next school year in all of our schools around staffing and course selections, all of that is already underway. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about the students moving to a remote learning option as we develop plans for next year. PPM 166 was released by school boards, and this PPM really relates to initiatives related to anti-sex trafficking. This is really important work for schools, but also it's a very important work for our department, because we know that our students, because of their profiles, can be more vulnerable than some others in being exploited. And so we have representation from our department on the Halton Regional team that involves Halton Regional Police Service, our co-terminus boards, as well as representatives from community agencies. And this group was instrumental in developing an administrative procedure related to anti-sex trafficking initiatives, and we'll continue to develop some learning resources for staff development in this area as well. I think I skipped over, and I apologize, that also a part of the ministry's release around funding is funding for tutoring supports. Our board will be receiving about $5.9 million that is to be spent between April and December 2020 on tutoring supports for students. We are, again, waiting on the technical papers on what exactly this could look like. We understand that these tutoring supports can be offered during the school day, outside of the school day, or in the summer. And so we look forward to collaborating with our school programs department, as well as our mental health and well-being team, because I think it's all under one envelope on what the supports for our students could look like. So definitely more to come back to this group on that. But again, we're waiting on the technical paper. And the last thing just to touch on, which we've touched on quite a few times, it's been a running theme this evening, is the release of the Right to Read executive summary and recommendations. I will, when we share out the presentation, I will share out a link to that executive summary, and it will be a really important work that will guide both special education and school programs. And again, more to come on our implementation plan as we have an opportunity to really dive into what those recommendations are. And that's all for me.
Right, does anybody have any questions at this time? No, okay. So we're now at association reports. Does any association have a report that they would like to make? Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Allison. We are, I'm part of the Halton Down Syndrome Association. We are very excited for March. On the third month of the 21st day is World Down Syndrome Day, representing the 3 copies of chromosome 21 that a person with Down syndrome has. So Halton District School Board has always been really fantastic in sharing the joy of our students being in your board, and we run a school contest through the association that many of our elementary and high school teachers and students participate in, which is fantastic. That brings awareness and advocacy and celebration for our students. So it's great to see that throughout the board. I know many schools and our families have shared wonderful messages and posters that have already gone out. So we hope that your families and your schools will also see some information coming for World Down Syndrome Day on March the 21st, which happens to not fall on March break this year, which is exciting. It'll be the first day back after March break. So we encourage everyone to rock their socks and celebrate World Down Syndrome Day with us. Thank you.
Sounds wonderful. Any other reports at this time? Catherine.
Sorry. So with Voice, we have a Mother Goose program that's currently right now virtual. So it's for kids who are 2 to 4, and it's like an early literacy program. And it's free. So if we have families who are deaf, hard of hearing and wanted to partake who's 0 to 4 years old. So either in JKs, and I think it'd be really good so they can learn sounds and words through nursery rhymes. And in May, we have a Dress Loud Day because May is Hearing Awareness Month. So we have Dress Loud. So you just dress in your wackiest, colorful clothing and just be proud. So we have stuff coming up and finding how we could do that. So schools who do have hard of hearing kids can participate, and it's a really fun day.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Catherine. Any other association reports at this time? I will briefly mention our report then. So first of all, the Learning Disabilities Association of Halton Hamilton would like to thank the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal for the 2.5 years of work that they put into the Right to Read inquiry, which closed yesterday with the publication of their report. This report addresses the inequity of service experienced by many students with reading disabilities across Ontario and puts forward 157 recommendations to improve the support that they receive in our education system. This includes training educators on evidence-based approaches of structured literacy and eliminating balanced literacy, some of which we heard about this evening, increasing the assessment of progress to twice a year for all students in K-12, increasing the availability of psych ed assessments, earlier intervention programs, such as the ones we heard today, appropriate accommodations, such as retaining our students at grade level, and universal design for learning in all classrooms. It also recommends increasing funding from the Ministry of Education to all school boards to ensure that this happens without negatively impacting other exceptional students. We are excited as an organisation to see these recommendations implemented, and we offer our support and services to HDSB to help in any way that we can. One of the ways that LDAHH currently offers support is through the organisation of its annual Solutions for Learning conference. This is taking place this weekend online, and we encourage anyone who hasn't yet purchased a ticket to do so. We have 16 fantastic speakers talking about evidence-based approaches to support students with learning disabilities and/or ADHD, both academically and emotionally. We will have Dr. Linda Siegel, one of the 2 experts retained by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, talking about the implications of this report on education in Ontario. Tickets are available at www.ldahh.ca, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you. So any more association reports? If not, we will move on to the trustees report.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, everybody. I believe I'm presenting on behalf of Heather and myself and Joanna and Margot this evening. So just a few points. In the information that we'll be sharing with Lorna, we will provide the link to the new anti-sex trafficking procedure that Colette referenced in her report. Then just again, in addition to Colette's report around the budget, your ideas and perspectives about this year's budget are certainly invited prior to that session that we have with Roxana Nagoy as well. And we'll provide you with the link to a survey that is posted on the board's website. And input to that survey is requested by March the 7th. And then that gets all packaged up in themes and priorities of the community are brought to the board table and other groups that are considering budget related things in the coming months. Director Ennis is hosting a panel series on identity, inclusion, and human rights. And we let you know about the first one, which took place a few weeks ago. And the second one was released yesterday. It's called Black Excellence Today and Every Day. And we'll provide you with the link to check that out if you're interested. The format of those sessions are panels. So there were
I believe, 6 people with varying lived experiences that spoke yesterday. And it was really, I believe, very impactful and great learning. And then lastly, trustees on SEAC brought forward the conversation that we had here last month related to PPM 81 and your letter that you wrote is appended to this board package, I believe, and your perspectives were well felt and agreed upon by the Board of Trustees. And so as a group and through Margot, Chair Shuttleworth, we also wrote a letter to the province expressing our support for your perspective and the staff positions that were written about, and just kind of adding our own encouragement for more authentic engagement, increased timelines for engagement, reconsideration of some of the thoughts and concepts that were put forward in the consultation document, and lastly, reconsideration of that timeline. Just given everything that's happening, September is maybe not the best time to add new things to everybody's plates and do it in a good way. So hopefully amongst ourselves, we have sent a clear message to the province for consideration. And that's our report for tonight. Happy to take any questions. And lastly, I would just note that Heather and I have been taking notes. We're trying our very best to report through to the board what happens at these meetings, your perspectives, the issues and challenges that are raised. So in addition to our report, I would also invite any topics that you want us to bring forward, not just now, but we're always open to do that. So thank you very much. And you're welcome about the letter, responding to the chat box.
Great. Yes, and on behalf of SEAC, I would like to say to the trustees, certainly from my perspective, I feel very strongly that you take our message back to the Board of Trustees, and we appreciate that very strongly. It's good to know that our voice is actually being heard, and so we, as a group, on behalf of SEAC, we appreciate that. So at this point in time, if there are any questions for the trustees. No? Okay. So we have now the committee reports. So I'll go through the list of standing committees and ask for any updates. First of all, the Parent Involvement Committee. Are there any updates from that committee? Can I just ask, do we have a representative on that committee? I just wondered whether we haven't had any meetings, or do we have a representative that sits on PIC? Okay, perhaps that's something that we need to consider, or whether we actually have a representative, or maybe it's one of the representatives that's not here tonight, but we'll have to go back and look in our documents to make sure that we do have a representative on the Parent Involvement Committee that's sitting on our behalf. Okay, the next one is the Accessibility Coordinating Committee.
I have nothing to report on the committee at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. Equity Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee. I think that's Diane, but she's not here tonight. Okay, and the Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy Steering and Advisory Committee.
That's me, Allison, and there's nothing to report at this time. But we'll have upcoming meeting in this month. So next month I will have something to report back.
Great, thank you very much, Charlene. Okay, so we're now at item 5.0. Next agenda, anything to be added to the agenda. Community Living has expressed interest in making a presentation to us. We have asked for, if any organizations would like to make a presentation on their work that has happened in the past, and we'd love to hear the amazing work that everybody does. So we've definitely got Community Living. I think Autism Ontario we're hoping that they'll be able to make a presentation at some point. Colette, I see your hand is up.
At our April meeting, we will be spending some time on the 2022-23 Special Education Plan. And given that it is such a dense document, we would like to give you plenty of time to read through it. So we will be sending it out by email by the end of this week. I'll certainly speak to some of the key highlights around changes at our April meeting. And there will be an opportunity for any questions or comments that you would like to bring forward. And then that special education plan will come back in June for a vote. So again, lots of time in between for you to take it back to your associations, to do your own reflections, and then a final step for a vote in June. So look in your inboxes later this week.
Great. And I certainly appreciate on behalf of the associations that additional time to, as you say, reflect on the document that's so important to our communities. Tracy.
Hi, sorry, and this is out of order on the agenda, Allison, but I just jumped over to the most recent PIC minutes, and I do note and know that they've reformatted a little bit in terms of representatives and so on, and I don't see a SEAC rep on there, and I'm not sure that there was one in the past either. And in addition, the trustees on SEAC and the trustees on PIC don't overlap. So there's only, because we don't have representation here from HMC Connections, I don't believe, and that's the community organization that sits on PIC. So if there is interest, at the very least, I can put in our trustee report a link to the minutes of the PIC sessions. And I know they have their, or have traditionally had an annual gathering that everybody would certainly be invited to that learning session. But yeah, just to your point about whether that anybody's ever going to answer you when you say, is there a committee report there? It doesn't actually sound like it. So for this time, I'll put the link in our trustee report to their minutes, and then maybe somebody can let me or us know if that's useful at all or of interest.
Great. And just to ask a question then, would they like to have a representative from SEAC on PIC? Perhaps we could find that out, and because I think we used to have somebody. I'm not sure when it left, but if they were interested in having somebody, I'm sure that there is an association member that would be willing to join.
I think that there was previous membership on that committee.
Yeah.
But I've forgotten who it is. But I think there was previously somebody that was there, because I remember taking things through to their conference.
Right, yeah. Colette?
I'm happy to connect with Superintendent Flahat, who is leading that work from the superintendent side, and check in with him around a timing to join, whether we can add a representative for the balance of the school year, or whether it would make sense that someone joins in September. But I'm happy to bring that back next meeting.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so with that being said, we are now at item 6.0. We have completed our agenda. It is 8:54, and we're going to adjourn our meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for a wonderful discussion, and to all the staff for a very in-depth set of presentations. And I wish everybody the best and a wonderful March break, which is going to be coming up shortly. Hopefully everybody gets some rest and recuperation, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Take care and